Great, good to see everyone here today. I'll call the meeting to order and just say we have Director Daniel Arbor from Area A online. In the room, we have Directors McCollum, Kerr, Grieve, Hillian, myself, Grant, Hardy, Morin, and Brown. And just wanted to begin, as we always do, by just acknowledging we're gathering today on the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. And as is our practice, we'll read one of the calls to action. We're at call to action number 56, the National Council for Reconciliation. We call upon the Prime Minister of Canada to formally respond to the report of the National Council for Reconciliation by issuing an annual State of our Aboriginal Peoples report, which would outline the government's plans for advancing the cause of reconciliation. All right, and moving to business, I'll first take a motion for adoption of the September 10th minutes. Moved and seconded. Any questions on that? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And petitions and delegations. We have a delegation from Solid Outreach Society. So Tasia, I don't know if you want to head up to the podium or. If you just tap the button, then I can get it live for you. Just at the base of the, there's a gray button. Perfect, and now you're live.
Can I do it? Yes.
Yep.
This does not get easier. Thank you for having me. Thanks for being here, guys. My name is Tasia. I am the manager of Solid Outreach here in the Valley. And we have been operating since about February. So who we are, Solid is run by and for people who have been criminalized and stigmatized for their illicit drug use. We offer training, education, and supports to build capacity among our community to provide life-saving overdose prevention and harm reduction services, as well as advocacy for inclusion in the services, research, and policy making which impact our communities. We are committed to building relationships with local nations to ensure our community work meets the needs of Indigenous peoples and settlers who are suffering from lack of access to basic needs such as housing, health, and community supports on these lands. We are committed to maintaining an organization led by and for many urban Indigenous peoples. Primarily operated in Victoria since 2007 and have recently expanded to over 100 employees. We operate through contracts from Island Health, BC Housing, and FNHA, First Nations Health Authority. Our executive director, board chair, and more than half of the board members are Indigenous. People with lived experience or lived and living experience bring a unique and individual or invaluable, oh my goodness, invaluable perspective to any discussion. Having firsthand knowledge and real world insights has bridged the gap between theory and practice, making community programs more effective and responsive to the actual needs. By including the voices, we have fostered a more inclusive environment where everyone's experiences have been valued and respected. Sustainable solutions are created with approaches that are multifaceted and diverse to include the voices of people with lived and living experience, and which we will continue to advocate for always. Through HSS funding, we were able to provide encampment outreach support alongside our City of Courtenay bylaw. The unhoused and or precariously housed have been advocating for supports for quite some time, or supports like these for quite some time. And with this funding, we were able to provide a service that truly met people where they were at. Those supports included transportation to hospital, including seeing that client and patient through their hospital care, being a liaison between the nurses, doctors, or charge nurse. Transportation to medical appointments, wound care, overdose response, support in relocating encampments, and community partnerships were built along the way. Solid Outreach is also funded here locally to provide episodic overdose prevention with Island Health and the iHost van. In partnership with them, we've expanded this outreach services to Comox Valley, and we provide medical assistance, distribute harm reduction supplies, inform folks about treatment options and support programs. Additionally, we offer education, training, and peer support primarily to those unhoused or precariously housed. And by creating a non-judgmental environment, these services aim to foster trust and encourage individuals to seek help when they are ready, ultimately contributing to improved public health outcomes and safer communities. Just below there, I added a QR code for folks who use alone. 72% of unregulated drug toxicity deaths are men aged 30 to 39, and half of those deaths are in private residences. So if you or someone you know uses drugs alone, please consider using the Brave app. Empathy, compassion, and understanding always begins with a story. Part of our training, it was a priority to me to provide meaningful connection within that. And I believe that Walk With Me should be as mandatory as basic first aid. I reached out to Walk With Me after we had been requested to provide a funeral service for someone's fiance that passed in our community. And after we were able to provide that service, and gratefully the art gallery allowed us to use their front area there, we have now partnered with the art gallery and Walk With Me to provide monthly vigils. We don't necessarily get invited to our friends' funerals when we are unhoused or otherwise. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't come with grief. So it's important for everyone to have a place to go, share stories, and grieve. Community, the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. It's a quote from Brené Brown. I believe that we all can relate to a sense of community, whether it's family or friends or our place of work. Some of us are fortunate to have all three. The community that we have established and we've built relationships with, City of Courtney bylaw, the art gallery, Walk With Me, North Island Hospital, Comox Valley Community Action Team, Island Health, the Community Justice Center, and through Restorative Justice, Substance Drug Checking, Coalition to End Homelessness, which we are now members of, the Homeless Response Team, and many more to come. So some of our outcomes through the peer outreach, over 1,000 hours peer outreach has been completed since about March. We have responded to over 40 overdoses and have had successful reversals, over 15 hospital supports, which can include up to 6-8 hours of support. We know what the emergency room looks like and the wait times. Over 60 connections to health services, and over 60 encampment outreach support, like direct services. That number 2, we've lost 2 of our outreach workers. And unfortunately, some of us were there to find them. So I realized that although those other numbers they're great, and they're a part of why I really want to continue this work. And the number 2 is the main reason why I want to continue this work. One of our staff, she's unable to be here today because she is in Ontario visiting her family. She is also our local Mom Stop the Harm advocate, so another community partner there. just some photos of people that what we lost and we remember. We know this work is important and has made a significant and positive impact on our community, our peace officers, and the peer outreach team. Grants such as the HSS are very useful in allowing a pilot program to develop and show what forms of programs are possible. So in solidarity, on behalf of myself and David, Kylie, Jolene, Amanda, Jackie, Shar, and John, and rest in peace, Carla and Tim. I am hoping to continue the funding. Yeah, open to questions.
Okay, thanks, Tasha, and thanks to the rest of your team over here. Much appreciated. I'm gonna open the floor up to any questions that people have, including online. Turn it over to Director Brown.
I'm not sure I have a question. That was hard. Thank you. And thank you for bringing all of that here. What was, maybe that's how I'll formulate the question. What was the amount of the grant you had and what is the ask moving forward?
We are requesting in the realm of about 99,000. And I have a budget proposal that I can submit.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tasha. And I'll turn it over now to Director Morin.
Great, thanks, Chair. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'm fairly familiar with your work. Very supportive. I just wanted to mention the memorial services that or the monthly memorial, sorry, I can't remember. Vigil, sorry. And I attended, I think, last month, and I just wanted to encourage all my colleagues to support that. We know, as you mentioned, many people who die from the toxic drug supply, families don't have funerals or don't even put in obituaries, the reason for death. These folks go, their deaths go unnoticed by many. And I think that if local leaders can show support by going to those vigils, hopefully that would just show a sense of support and that these lives lost are not going unnoticed. Thanks.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think we never think it's going to happen to us until it does. And being a part of a small community, you don't notice it's happening until it really does. I can't imagine it's going to get any better. And it's really important that it becomes visible before it gets worse.
Pass it over to Director Helene.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Taya, for being here today and for the work that you're doing. I'm not sure that we're going to give you $99,000, but I just wanted to clarify, you mentioned funding support that you have received from Island Health and other groups. Is Solid Comox Valley receiving core funding from any of the provincial agencies just now?
From Island Health, yes, we are funded for episodic overdose prevention.
Okay, so so basically you're looking for extra funding to expand or do additional work?
To continue the encampment outreach along with our bylaws. Also can supply a letter of support from Mike Kerbers.
Okay, thanks very much for clarifying that.
Thanks.
And the comment by Director Brown.
Sorry, so is that annual funding and is it secured for multiple years, or is the Island Health funding, or is that, do you have to reapply and reapply?
So hopefully in the near future, we will see a request for proposals go out for the temporary fixed safe inhalation site, to which we will apply for that contract.
Okay.
To work alongside and with Island Health, kind of matching the model that they have in Victoria.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. And Director Morin.
Sorry, another I guess, clarification or comment. So we know that luckily the inhalation site is coming. And I guess I'm wondering what your sense is once that's online. Do you think that that will alleviate? I mean, obviously not everybody's going to use that site, but I would hope that it would alleviate some of the pressure on you doing the episodic overdose prevention. And I also wanted to mention, not to blow the horns of local politicians, but I can say that I believe probably pretty much all of us were very vocal at the recent UBCM when meeting with the ministers and provincial staff on these issues, and you know, hoping for some encampment support and different things through some of those funding streams. So we were quite loud, quite vocal, and again, not to, you know, just really trying to work on the behalf of all the people on the front lines. Yeah, so I'm just curious about that episodic overdose response, if you feel it will be alleviated somewhat once the inhalation supervised inhalation site is operational. Thanks.
Oh, I do. I think it's still important to provide an outreach model. Like you said, not everyone is going to use that service. I think institutions have broken relationships over longer than I've been alive, and things take time. Takes time to build trust back. I think that having peer support there and people with lived and living experience will definitely be a positive in bridging that gap. We will encourage people to use the temporary fixed site, and I am very confident in the outreach teams and the Island Health staff for how well they do their work and how supportive they are of us. I think that although maybe umbrellaed with Island Health, they're still really good people within that work. Very proud to work with them. I also don't want to get too far from the two separate fundings, like with the HSS and the encampment outreach. All of the services that we were able to provide in that go far beyond overdose prevention. Being able to connect people who may not have a phone, may not be able to get up out of their tent, relieving pressure from bylaw. It is their job to uphold the bylaws, and we respect that. I think we can do it more efficiently and with their support. A lot of the things that we did, I would say, came out of our own pocket funds. We drove our own vehicles and paid for our own gas, and we still took people to the hospital who didn't want to get into an ambulance, or drove them to iHost, or walked them somewhere just so they'd be able to get there. With the illicit supply right now and how unregulated and heavily benzoed it is, sometimes a 5-minute walk can take 45 minutes and then you've missed your appointment. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tasha. And I just appreciate my colleague's question. I just wanted to add one as well. In addition, is you had the QR code for the Brave app, and find that in conversations that I have about the toxic drug crisis, one of the things that tends to surprise people most is the number of overdoses that occur in private homes, particularly by men of that age and alone. And I just was wondering if you have any information about what the uptake of use of the Brave app is, and whether it's managing to do the good work it's intended to do.
What I love about the Brave app and the Brave co-op is that it is a technology that's designed by drug users for drug users. When you log into the app, you make your own profile and your own safety plan. Your safety plan can also include not calling 911 in the event you become unresponsive, as long as you have an alternative. So it could be my mom's in the next room, my neighbor is home, this is their phone number, and that provides a lot of safety for folks, considering if someone has a warrant or whichever the circumstances are, they're marginalized. However, and coming into contact with paramedics or possibly our CMP can pose a greater risk than death in that moment to them, unfortunately.
Thanks. And I've heard people say exactly that about that app. And that's what makes it stand out from the others is the ability to have control over how you want, what kind of support you want and how. So good to hear it's in greater use in the community. I'm not seeing any more lights, and as you probably know, our policy is that we don't make any decisions on the evening. So we just want to just have the chance to take in everything you've said, and we'll return to this as a board in an upcoming meeting. But thank you, Tasia, and thank you to the rest of your crew for coming in today.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome to stay for the remainder. It's probably not going to be super interesting unless you're a big fan of local government. We're going to approve some minutes in a minute.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tasia. Okay, so moving on to those minutes, we have rec committee minutes from July 30th for receipt. Okay, moved and seconded. Any questions on that? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. We have EASC minutes from September 9th for receipt. Moved and seconded. Any questions? Any opposed to receipt? Sewer committee meeting, commission meetings for September 10th. Thank you. Move seconded. Any questions? Any opposed? Regional Parks and Trails, September 10th minutes. Moved and seconded. Any questions? Any opposed? And we have Transit Management Advisory Committee minutes for May 14th and September 10th. Okay. And any questions? And actually, I had a question. So if you had a moment, Mike. Thanks so much. Oh, I see Director Brown has a question. So you go ahead and then I'll go after.
And super simple. I just noticed there was no Cumberland rep in attendance, making sure we do have a Cumberland rep. And who is that?
Yeah, you do have a rep. One or both of Rob Crisfield and
Or
Joel
Joel.
Clarkson
Okay.
attend usually, but I guess that might have been a summer vacation
She don't like
issue.
holidays.
So, yeah.
Okay.
And my question was, there was reference in the most recent set of minutes to just some slides that you were shown about the Evolve bike share and how that's going. And my understanding is it's going well. I'm just wondering, are you able to put any, provide any sort of greater insight into what it's looked like since the program began?
Yeah, it's going well. I didn't bring the slides here, obviously, so I don't have all the
If you have
exact
any
numbers,
highlights,
but
then,
I think they were seeing an upward trend, month over month. They've only been operating for about 3 months now, so they're really kind of shy of the numbers. They'd like to get 6 months or something like that before they kind of come back and do a public presentation or an update to the board. But we'll definitely be getting them back here. I would expect later this year. They're seeing a lot of use from younger people, not as much seniors. After 8 o'clock is kind of when things really pick up, and there's a lot during like midnight and 2 a.m. and when there aren't other transportation options that are available like transit or taxis. No, so not surprising. They're starting to see, initially it was a lot of round trips, so people were picking up a bike at a particular parking station, going for a little ride and ending up back when it started. So they were trying it out, and now they're starting to see more people are one-way trips. They're picking it up at one spot, they're going somewhere, and they're dropping it off at a different parking station. So that's a good thing. That's what we were hoping. I think, yeah, they were kind of in the mid 20 rides per day on average. So some days, when it rains, less. Other days when it's really nice, especially on the weekends, they're up into the 30s and 40s. There's a bunch of really frequent users that are riding it, over and over again. And mostly right now, there's people that have ridden it once, twice. They, just kind of starting to experiment with it. So. Yeah, more stats from BCA to come later this year, but they're happy with the way things are going so far.
Okay, that's good to hear. And I noticed in the minutes, they added two different, at least two different spots, the airport and North Island College. So the fact that they're rolling out more locations must be a positive sign overall. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. And this has started a whole bunch of questions about these minutes, so just get comfortable. Director McCollum?
Yeah, I had a question about something else in the minutes, but I just wanted to chime in about the Evolve bikes. Something that I shared with the representatives when we were at UBCM is that it's lacking an annual pass, and if they want to see regular users and people replace their own bike ownership, like in apartment buildings and such, a yearly annual pass is a really good way to get people invested in that, and other bike shares in other cities do have that. So I don't know how that will be received. It's obviously a private business and it's up to them how they do it, but that is something that I suggested. And then I also learned from them that we have so many areas in Courtney with such poor cellular reception that some of the areas are not able to have the bike share in place because the bikes can't connect with the network, such as Woodcote Park. I think Puntledge Park would probably fit into that as well, because I live there and I know there's no cellular reception. So yeah, just thought I would share that because that's something I hadn't thought of, but we do have some real challenges with our cellular network here, and it's connected to the bikes. So, but that's not my question. My question is around in the fair review part of the minutes, there's a note that there's an interest or consideration of bringing in a universal pass for transit for university or our local college students, which I've always thought is a great idea. I benefited from that as a university student, and it was heavily discounted. And everyone paid in, but it was considerably less than what it would have cost to buy a monthly transit pass. And there's no mention of if that is part of what we're talking about, because I was quite surprised to see that the NIC Student Union is not supportive of that. This type of pass did come in when I was a UVic student. It was actually pushed by the student union, and I'm trying to understand the disconnect between that. So if there's some additional context you want to share, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, for sure. Through the chair to the board, the idea of a UPass was brought up at a fair review many years ago here, and over the years we've attempted to have conversations with the North Island College Student Union, as has BC Transit, and it's never been something that they've supported. It will be included as to consider during the upcoming fair review. There will be some more analysis by BC Transit, a bit of an update on recent conversations with the student union, which we've had as recent as about 2 months ago. We met with them to discuss that and other things. Their objections have typically been that the student profile here is different than places like UVic. The level of service is less here than it is in Victoria. So they haven't really seen the value for their students, but that's not to say that we can't have more dialogue with them and understand more what their interests, desires are for transit, and how we can maybe help provide that. And obviously the UPass brings with it a revenue to the regional district, which could maybe help bring improved service to the college. So yeah, we'll get a bit of an update in that fair review on the UPass for sure.
Okay, great, thanks. And Director Morin.
Thanks, Chair. I do have a question, but I just going to take the opportunity because at UBCM, I actually spent a bit of time with Evo Rec and was grilling them with questions and asking whether they were going to do an update. So it's good to hear that that's coming up. But I did basically get permission from him to share something that I thought was really important, and that is that all the kind of doom and gloom that was predicted before the bikes came in around vandalism, stealing, yada, yada, yada. Luckily, none of that has come to fruition. There was one minor incident that he mentioned that I can't say specifically, but it was actually, yeah, it was a more of a vandalism issue, not related to some of the comments that had been made ahead of time. So I just thought that that was important for people to know that they've basically had no incidents with the bikes. And I believe he said that Crown Isle was another new area that had been added and that they requested it, which is great. And he also said that, again, he didn't want to get into specific numbers, but said that the uptake here was a little bit higher than other communities of this size. So overall, I thought it was a pretty good report. My question was around, I was at a recent accessibility committee meeting where BC Transit was there, getting feedback from folks around accessibility improvements. And I don't think, I'm not sure if any of our staff were there or not, but it was primarily with BC Transit folks. But I just wondered if that was anything that was going to come back to us just in terms of some of those, some of that feedback.
Yeah, so we did have a staff member there, Dustin Bennett.
Right,
I was
yeah.
on one of those pesky holidays at the time, so was not able to attend. And yeah, BC Transit, the engineering firm that is doing the design work on the transit exchanges, they had
Mhm.
made a kind of an initial presentation on that project specifically, on that infrastructure that's going to get built to the accessibility committee, and got a lot of good feedback on transit infrastructure, but also feedback on, general transit things, unrelated to those projects. And so, yeah, they're taking that into account as they move forward with the design process. And I think when the designs are at a more complete stage, we'll be bringing something back to the board, just a bit of an update on that fairly large capital project, and show off the new designs and make sure everybody's happy with all that. And then we can make sure to speak to some of the accessibility features that are included in those designs.
Yeah, I just thought it was really great that folks were really great. BC Transit was very gracious with allowing all those other comments. In fact, I think I had one around the height of the signs for people who are in, lower down, height challenged or whatever. So yeah, I just thought that was great that happened. So thank you.
All right, well, thanks, Mike. And just one final thought on the Evolve is I had also heard that they're planning to replace the current solid plastic wheels with something that has an inner tube, and I think that will you'll see a huge uptick. It is a little literally jarring the first time you get onto one of those bikes, just shake the filling loose. But I think, yeah, going with inflatable tires, it's a good 19th century invention that will do them well. Anyway, thanks very much, and I appreciate you having all those answers for us. All right, so those minutes, we've had a few questions on them. Any opposed to receipt? And that passes unanimously. And I guess, Mike, you might as well just stay there. So the first report is the annual transit improvement program report. Motion for receipt, please. Moved and seconded, and I'll pass that over to our CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike Sabarski, our manager of transit facilities, is warmed up and ready to go, and we'll be introducing this report on the annual transit improvement program. Mike.
Thanks, James, through the CEO and the chair to the committee, or the board, sorry. So we have a presentation here. We've done this every year, so some of this is not new, but I'll try my best to kind of refresh on some of the highlights. If I can get the clicker to work. There we go. So yeah, so our annual transit improvement program is very much related to the Transit Future Action Plan. This was completed back in 2022. Bit of an update of the original Transit Future Plan from many years ago. The action plan kind of prioritizes the service improvements that the community wants, that the board was interested in, that support our strategic drivers and various strategies and plans. And so it really helps us when we have these annual transit improvement program requests. It really guides those decisions. The Transit Future Action Plan was also very much kind of intertwined with the Comox Valley Mobility Primer that was happening at the same time. The primer really speaks to how we can shift towards sustainable modes of transportation. And one of the big ones is obviously to invest in public transit. transportation is our largest source of greenhouse gases in the Comox Valley. It's also the second largest source of annual household expenses in the Comox Valley and across Canada. And so any of these other modes of transportation are more affordable and cleaner from a climate perspective. Public transit is also becoming really important when we start looking into the provincial and local initiatives around housing, the new legislation that's coming out, the complete communities assessments. That access to high frequency public transit is really important in those pieces of work as well. So this is an annual process we go through, the Transit Improvement Program. BC Transit recommends 3 years worth of service improvements and seeks the board's interest and direction on which of those service improvements they should pursue. We really just need to commit to that first year of their 3-year proposal. That allows them to go and secure the provincial share of funding, acquire buses, get the planning machine rolling to roll those service improvements out in that first year. We can revisit years 2 and 3 next year. Last year, during the TIP process, the board approved a 5,000-hour expansion for route number 5, really aimed at providing better access to the food bank and the farmers market, but also the sports center in Vanier Secondary School and kind of generally through the West Courtenay area. Also a 500-hour extension of route number 10, which now actually is connected to the Nanaimo transit service. That was implemented in September. I should say, before I get too far, that the 5,000-hour service expansion unfortunately was not implemented. It was not supported by BC Transit, well, by the province in their annual budget, but also primarily because there is a bit of a supply issue with procuring new vehicles, and that particular expansion would require 3 additional vehicles. So last year there was a lot of trouble trying to find new buses. So that one didn't happen, but we did get the 500-hour connection to Nanaimo in, and we also had an 800-hour extension of Handy Dart into the evening approved last year, and that's now been implemented as well. So Handy Dart now goes to 7 p.m. Weekdays, and I think Saturday. Also, just to note, this was a previous TIP expansion, but we finally implemented a 2,000-hour kind of service level maintenance expansion to deal with the sewer conveyance project. So this really wasn't about getting us more service, but it was about adjusting service to the traffic congestion and delays that are occurring because of the sewer conveyance project. So we're essentially maintaining the level of transit service from before the sewer project kicked off. So those 2,000 hours are also in use right now in the system. Bringing us forward to this year, the recommendations from BC Transit for the first year are shown up on the screen there. This is the first year from a BC Transit fiscal year, so you can see that it actually goes over 2 of our calendar years. The first expansion they're recommending is to do Handy Dart service on stat holidays. That's a very small investment, 150 hours, just over $6,000 cost to CBRD. That would happen next fall. The next one is to re-support that 5,000-hour expansion of Route 5. So just hoping for better luck this time and better supply availability on the vehicle front. That would happen in January 2026. And then the final one is to expand some service up into the Cumberland community. The service up there right now is about hourly during the week, and Saturday not much service on a Sunday, and then there's some gaps even during the week. There's some gaps during the day when there's more like a 2-hour no service situation. So that would fill those gaps, make sure there's hourly service Monday to Saturday, and then have a lot more frequency on the Sunday than currently exists. So that's an 1,800-hour expansion, requires 2 buses and about 183,000 CBRD cost. So from here, the next steps are for the board to confirm their interest in those expansions. Those would then be included in our financial plan moving forward. The total investment for that 25-26 fiscal year is $1,175,000. That's an increase over what's currently in the budget. That's the total. CBRD's CBRD's share of that is only 598,000, and it's worth noting that because Route 5 expansion was included in the TIP last year and supported, it was included in the financial plan. And so though the costs associated with that are currently already in financial plan, so there's only about $189,000 increase required to support that first year of expansion. And then because of the timing of those expansions, the 2025 fiscal year's only got a $1,500 increase. So most of the costs would be coming in 2026. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Mike. We got room light on in the room, one or two, and then we'll go to Director Arbor online, but we'll start off with Director Grant.
Yeah, thanks. Mike, I'm just wondering why the bus to the food bank and farmers market, why did they not proceed? Was it lack of ridership or?
It was a lot to do with the availability of buses. So during the COVID pandemic, there was no expansions. There was a provincial freeze on transit expansions. And so across the province, all those requests for expansions kind of built up and accumulated to a very significant request last year. And so there was a lack of buses to spread across the province to every single expansion. And BC Transit did some prioritization and really was kind of using the funding towards expansions that didn't require additional buses. So yeah, bus supply issue last year, and then just a overwhelming requests from other communities and ours that they couldn't support all of.
So you think it will work better if we come back a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever that is?
I'm hopeful. BC Transit suggested that their prioritization this year would try to catch up on all the unmet requests from last year. They've also suggested that if the bus supply issue continues to be a problem, that they would look at our particular requests and try and find a way to reduce the additional buses needed. So for example, if we were asking for service or expansion during the peak of service when all the other buses are already out, well, we need more buses to make that expansion work. But if we can shift that expansion to midday or later in the evening when there isn't all of the buses out on the road, then we can reuse those existing buses. So that might be what happens, is we need to kind of shift around when we deliver those expansions during the day.
That's why you get paid the big bucks to figure that out.
All right, and we'll go to Director Helene in the room and then to Director Arbor.
Thanks, Chair. Two questions. First, with regards to that service to food bank farmers market, I'm just curious about the 5,000 hours. How is that actually determined that that's the need? Even if that's everyday service, that's 13 hours a day of bus service. And it just occurs to me that maybe it could be concentrated and the hours spread out in a different way. But I don't know how this is figured. So if you could clarify that, please.
Yeah, so during the Transit Future Action Plan and the public engagement around those service improvements, they specifically were trying to seek some feedback from the public on that Route 5 expansion and what people were desiring out of that. And so there was some, rough schedules that were prepared, how frequent the bus would come, how does it start at 6 a.m., 10 a.m., 7 days a week, 5 days a week. So they kind of played around with different scenarios and got public feedback. And so the feedback was for around a 5,000 hour expansion. And so that would be much higher levels of service and frequency than obviously currently exists on Route 5. And it wasn't just about the farmers market and the food bank. It was, looking at the sports center and the hours of operation and the programming that's happening there. And then it's the high school students there that are, trying to get to extracurricular activities after school or want to stay at school for later, and so trying to provide them with a little bit more service. So that's kind of where the 5,000 hours came from. If there's interest in a different number of hours, the board can definitely provide that direction.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. The other question I had was regarding the service to Nanaimo that has been implemented. Do you have any data on the number of riders, and do you have any anecdotal information on what that's been like for people, whether it's takes too long and is too arduous to make it worthwhile, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, no stats, but definitely anecdotal information from the bus drivers and the operating company. It's working well, so the connection's working well, the layover's working well, the where we do the exchange is working well. Not a lot of riders. There's been, probably, I would say, a dozen or so that I've heard about in the couple of weeks that we've had that service in place. And feedback from most of them has been really positive. A couple of them have mentioned that it does take a long time to get to Nanaimo. It's 3 connections down to get down there. So it's really great for people that just want to go to the Bowser, Parksville, Qualicum area, but getting all the way down to Nanaimo and back is a long day. And we've actually had people from Campbell River that have gone all the way down and they can't get back in the same day. So they're forced to stay overnight somewhere.
Okay, so my plan of trying to get to Victoria and a couple of transfers for $5 is probably not gonna work. Thanks, Mike.
All right, and we'll go to Director Arbor, please.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I missed an email, but I'm disappointed that it didn't come into my awareness that service has started. I know Stuart McLean, my fellow director in RDN in Area H, and I were actually hoping to ride one of those first buses and make a buzz about it. The fact that I'm learning now that it's happening probably means there hasn't been a lot of advertisement in the community either. I do have an anecdote, and then I'll get to my question after. But it's interesting because the longer term play around the interregional transit is to try to have more regular service and the 99 type service that could resemble potentially what the Greyhound used to do, which had really good ridership back in the day. And we also know that the train is not on the horizon right now, so there is always the option of Island Link, but that is a private service that costs quite a bit. People may recall during the COVID era, the government of BC decided to invest in interregional transit, but they selected the Wilson Company to do that on the island. And I don't believe that service has continued for the most part. And then John Wilson, the owner of the business, has decided to run for the Conservative Party. So I don't know. I think that our comment to RMLA and others that they should invest in public interregional transit remains valid today. And we are just seeding something with about 30,000 a year. Yeah, it's going to be slow. But I can tell you that down south, 3 or 4 years out, the service between Nanaimo and Cowichan and CRD has increased. So if we do this properly and stay at it, I think we could get some good results in the long term. My comment wasn't going to be about that. My comment is about how staff and the advisory group arrive at such a large increase in hours for Cumberland. We've talked many times that Cumberland is really well serviced. They have a resident population of 4,500. Union Bay and Royston have 4,500 inhabitants together. We currently have less than half the service than Cumberland has. And the property tax base that pays into the service in Royston and Union Bay, I can assure you is higher than what Cumberland pays into the service. So why is it that there's this recommendation to favor, again, I don't want to activate Director Grief, but again, to favor the municipalities when in this particular instance, there's actually density and residents, it's just that they're not incorporated. I don't understand it. If staff can illuminate, that would be great.
Yeah, the transit improvement program is very much based on that transit future action plan. And so these are the service priorities that were identified as short-term priorities in that plan based on the public feedback of the day and the support and feedback from the board. Expansions into the rural areas were kind of on that medium-term priority list. Why the Cumberland one came ahead of those ones, I can't exactly recall, but I would suggest partly it is to deal with the density and the proximity, and it's just an easier expansion to implement that will get better ridership results typically than the rural areas. But I can't exactly remember the specifics.
Can I just have a quick follow-up?
Yes. go
And
ahead.
suggestion? Yeah, my suggestion, we've looked at ridership, we've gone around that circle a few times, and the ridership from Cumberland is actually quite low. It compares well to the rural areas currently, and maybe that's why we want to throw more buses at it, thinking that will help with ridership. But our one bus every 2 hours in Area B and in Area A actually currently compare in ridership to the one every hour in Cumberland. So I think the immediate rural areas, I'm not talking about Fanny Bay, I'm talking about Royston principally. So my suggestion is if staff could look at, if you're looking to enhance the Cumberland service, can you do it through the Royston Cumberland bus? So that there is something in there for the residents who contribute to the service and use the bus in Royston, and Union Bay might be far-fetched because that's I recognize that we're not structured that way, but at least Royston, which has about 3,000 residents, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can definitely ask BC Transit to, look at that during the service planning work that would happen for Route 2. It would be maybe to transfer some of that to Route 20, which is the one that goes up Royston Road into Cumberland. So I think we can definitely put that request forward.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And go to Director Morin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just want to go back to that Route 5 and really push push for that. It's discouraging that I believe and this is through no fault of our staff, because I know you've been advocating strongly, but I think we go back to actually 2021 when we first requested this. So if we're fortunate enough to get this expansion in 2026, that's 5 years from the original ask, 5 years from the time that people had identified that this was a route that was badly needed. Interestingly, at UBCM, I had a chat with the farmers market folks, and they had the numbers for the low income coupon program, and the Comox Valley, not surprisingly, had very good uptake of that program. And they actually mentioned that the reports that they get from the communities, it's absolutely transportation is imperative to the success of that program. And I mentioned that we were looking for improvements in that area, and they said, well, you would probably get even more people in the valley because the barrier of transportation is really connected to the uptake of that program. And of course, this route does not just include the farmers market. It includes, as you mentioned, the rec center and the school, which again is another these are folks that we want to increase use of transit with our youth. So, I mean, if it's approved, it's 2026, I guess I think, yeah, you have 25, 26 expansions, but any of these requests there's no way that any of them would be implemented before 2026, I guess is what you're saying.
The recommendation, or I guess the suggestion from BC Transit was that kind of the soonest that they could put that in on the road would be January 2026.
Well, if there's any way to just say that we have been waiting for 5+ years, it would be great, because these are our most barriered folks in many, youth who don't drive, people with low incomes. Like, we really want, I think, to look at that piece. So I would just be a loud voice in the room. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Morin. And we'll go to Director McCollum.
Yeah, thanks for this report. It's unfortunate we weren't able to receive a bigger support last year, but happy to see it come back, and it's great that it's already included in what we expanded our tax requisition for last year. I just wanted to pick up on the service expansion that was implemented to Fanny Bay, Deep Bay, and just acknowledge the work of my colleague, Director Arbour, on this. Like he pointed out, the train may or may not be coming in the future, but if we want to develop a system that people rely on public transportation, putting the work in and providing options in advance of a train coming will ensure that that's a more successful service should it arrive one day. And if we expect everyone to just get out of their private vehicles the day that we, get a multi-billion-dollar train, we're dreaming. So this is a step in the right direction, and it's an impressively small investment that was made to make that happen. And while we were having this discussion, I just, quickly put in my phone, for my location to Victoria, public transportation, you could do it. In fact, you don't even have to walk anywhere. It'll take you all day. If you want to leave tomorrow morning around 8:45, you can be there by 5 p.m. It'll cost you less than $10. So for those that have more time than money, that's now an option that we didn't have until very recently. So just want to commend the people that have brought that forward. Thanks.
Thanks for that. And Mike, I was just going to add to that. I think Director Arbor raised an interesting point about the new connection with Nanaimo. Just wondering how much public awareness has been built on that, because I think it's something that people find inherently interesting. Like when I talk to people in the community about, they are really genuinely pleased that we're working together with neighbors and trying to build a bigger network. And it sounds like, if Director Arbor is pretty tapped into what's going on in this region. If he didn't hear about it, then maybe we need to find a better way of getting the word out to people when we're introducing something like significant and new. But how do we advertise our new routes?
Yeah, so BC Transit kind of handles the initial marketing around introducing new routes or other expansions, and typically after they've done that first blast, they're out, and then it's up to us. So this is just a couple weeks old now, and we're looking at what we can do, the rest of this year and into next year to kind of keep the awareness at least, maybe higher than it should be or that it is right now. So how do we boost that awareness? How do we promote that service while at the same time recognizing that it's not, the most amazing, you can get to Victoria in 2 hours for $2 kind of service. So we have to temper those expectations a little bit. And yeah, so it's a little bit of a communications effort that we'll do this fall and try our best to raise awareness, raise the ridership numbers, at least down to the, Parksville, Qualicum area, maybe Nanaimo, probably not Victoria. So yeah, we'll that's our role, and we're going to get on that soon.
That sounds good. I mean, I think some people do have the time in their lives to take the scenic route, and if 0 to Nanaimo in 3.5 hours is appealing, and I think for some younger folks it probably is. But yeah, we've obviously got work to do there. Okay, are there any further questions on this item? Director Arbor, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one since you raised it, Chair. As we're talking, I'm definitely going to be in touch with Stuart, my colleague in RDN, and we might do something on our own in terms of advertising to our communities. And for Mike, I think the big wins may not be, I think it's great to talk about the connection, as you say, to Nanaimo and Victoria, but the big immediate win, depending on the amount of service, is there's already an integrated community, a little bit like you see with Black Creek and Oyster River and that whole area the south of Campbell River. And a lot of people from Bowser go to Union Bay and have friends there. And there's a lot of interconnectivity in the Union Bay to Bowser and Qualicum Bay corridor. So even just starting there with that awareness for those communities to know that that link is now made and how often a day, if it could be in the community papers or something like that for those communities, I think that would be already a big step, and it might actually start to affect ridership right away. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And seeing no further questions, we're still on receipt. So I'll ask if there's anyone opposed to receipt. Seeing none, there are 2 recommendations. Was that both, Director Helene? Are you moving one or both? I couldn't quite hear. Okay, move one. Director Grant, I'm sure, is seconding it mentally before, but hasn't said it yet. All right, so recommendation 1 is on the table. Any questions or comments? Oh, Director Arbor, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I could just do a minor, suggest a minor amendment on under point B, that 1,800 service hours for Route 2, and I would say and consideration of Route 20 for service to Cumberland to improve service levels.
Okay. That's second, and that's an amendment. And Lisa, did you capture that? And consideration of Route 20, and that's the end of the sentence in B, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we have an amendment on the floor. It's being seconded. Any comments on the amendment? Anyone opposed to the amendment? Great, that passes unanimously. And so now the recommendation as amended. Any final comments on that? Anyone opposed? So recommendation one as amended. Thank you. 2 is now on the table. Any questions or comments? Anyone opposed to recommendation 2? Great, and that passes unanimously. I think maybe we'll take like a 5-minute break at this point. We've been sitting for a little while and we've got some big items coming up. So we'll see you all in about let's say quarter after. It's 5:07 right now. Okay, folks, like one more minute and we'll try and get ourselves back going again. All right. Directors, we're a couple minutes late getting started again, but I think everyone's got food in front of them. Hopefully you do as well, Director Arbor. And we're going to get back to the meeting. So we've got for receipt, community partnerships and grant data analysis and proposed framework report. Someone wants to move? Moved and seconded. Thanks very much. I'll pass it over to James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to introduce Lisa Kilpatrick and Michelle Hébert. I'm sorry, Michelle, if I've got your last name wrong. Michelle is our social planning coordinator. Lisa is our community development and resilience manager, and they're going to present this staff report. But I did want to provide a bit of context around this report. Most often, you as directors will see reports that include a recommendation, and we will speak to that recommendation. There might be some options put forward, but it's often a fairly linear conversation in the sense that there is that recommendation put forward. You'll note in today's report here, there are no recommendations. And the intent is that we are looking to have some dialogue and have some discussion around an eventual framework. So Michelle and Lisa will provide some context and background. And then in the staff report, there are some questions. And one of the appendices is a draft framework, but there are a lot of gaps in it, lots of information to be filled in. And I think what we're hoping today is to get some feedback and dialogue from the directors around some of that content for the framework. And then we will come back to you at a later time. We may not come back with a final version. We may need to have another conversation like this one and have some more dialogue. But the intent is here is to have that facilitated discussion. So I think, Michelle, you're starting off with this granting analysis report, some of the background information, and then we'll move more into the framework itself. So without further ado, Lisa or Michelle? Lisa, you're going to kick it off. Great, thanks.
Great, thanks. Through the chair to the directors. So thanks, James. This is well framed. This is a conversation that we want to have with you. We're presenting you with some approaches. It's a starting point to using data to review and assess the allocation of our resources and implementing a transparent framework that will guide the work of CVRD to continue supporting and enhancing the community well-being through our grants and partnerships. It can also assist in creating and maintaining capacity in the CVRD, but also within our local organizations, because we all see the new, we feel it, we experience it, and we hear the new and increasing demands facing our community on external services, but also on our internal services. So the other piece here is that it's also supporting and aligning with the work that's being done by other staff. You'll hear from Jake later on around the social grants piece, and the work that Michelle has done is supporting some of the analysis on that. So as we move forward, we're going to be talking today about how we can use data, but also how the framework can support us into the future and incorporate principles of equity, transparency, and accountability into the work that we do in supporting community. So I'll pass it over to Michelle, and she'll go through the granting analysis report.
Thank you and good evening through the chair to the directors. This is an opportunity, as Lisa mentioned, for me to share with you what I've put together for granting analysis. And as I move forward into this presentation, it's meant to be a general overview, and I want to give an opportunity at the end to be able to, again, ask some questions, have that discussion, bring about awareness for everyone on this topic. So an overview for what I'll be going forth and discussing in the next slides will be the purpose, why we brought this forth, what this analysis hopefully can bring And also information about the data that I worked with. And also the created categories. In order to analyze the data, we had to create categories. And with that, there's some information in the appendix of the report that's very useful. I'll be going through that. Then I move into showing data visualization. So these are the graphs, the bar charts, everything related that helps us to understand, helps us to visualize. And then finally, at the very end, will be that opportunity to have a discussion to really look at things and to figure out what is helpful from the perspective of the board and for moving forward. So looking at the purpose, excuse me, first and foremost, in the report, it pretty much states the purpose is to understand recent trends in CVRD grant funding, which can help inform the number and type of grant services and programs, and if those are sufficient to meet the needs of the community. Data analysis in this context can also be used to support the development of efficient and equitable granting processes. So this context of providing overview for what's happening, especially for what we're looking at tonight, is not meant to be an analysis of yes, we want to do this with it, and let's make a decision about that, and let's not do this, or let's specific decisions. It's actually meant to be a broader picture. Will this be helpful in the future? How do we want to use data? How can it support us? So with that, I've given examples, and I'll be showing a few examples of what we call drilling, excuse me, what we call drilling down into the data, which is looking at different levels of the data to help us to understand things. Another purpose is to assist with the reporting and decisions, specifically the reports that have come forth, the Social Development Grant Service and member feedback that's coming up, and then also the community partnerships proposed framework that Lisa's going to be discussing. Those reports have utilized some of this data analysis information. And finally, the main purpose is really to engage the board and get feedback for further direction. So about the data, in order to look at the data that we received, and we received this from the finance department about all grants that are granted through CVRD services here. We had to take a look at bringing about different categories and assigning those categories. So these categories are the areas for which the grants make sense. Like they fall under a different category, whether it's social-based grants, whether they're economic to support the economic well-being of the community and organizations in the community, could be arts, culture, and heritage-related grants. Things related to the environment. It could be natural environment or built environment. Grants related to search and rescue. Grants related to sports and recreation. And finally, grants related to community facilities. So all these different types of grants exist currently, but they've never officially been categorized as such. So that was our first task, is to really take a look at which areas these grants would fall under. And so we created those categories. We also take a look at what we need to purposely exclude from the data analysis. So this data that you're going to see tonight has certain factors purposely excluded, including climate rebate programs are not included, municipal library grants, and also grants to municipalities. So those have been excluded. And there's more information under methods and limitations, which is in the appendix. So I didn't include everything with regards to the analysis and the methods and the different things in this presentation, but they can be referred to. Also in the appendix, Appendix A includes several tables that are really useful. Table A, which you see on the right, table A1, this is a master list of all the different functions that have a description next to them. And those descriptions quite often describe the service that's associated with the function. There's also a category listed for the grant type. So as you can see, the grant types, like I said, we've created different categories, whether they're social, environment, sports and recreation. And on that list, you can actually take a look at the different functions and see what categories they're in. But the categories that are NA, obviously we take certain functions like 120, 121, which is the rural grant and aid. Those, or which are called rural community grants, those don't have one specific category. They could be for any type. They could be for a social issue or innovation. They could be for an environmental project or program. So that's why you'll see NA next to those. And those I had to categorize with regards to the particular organization, and I went in and actually categorized those in a different way. So pretty much everything's been categorized, but this gives an idea of if the specific function has been categorized. And then the table on the left, A2, talks about and really gives an overview of the category, the specific categories, and also the different functions. It gives relevant bylaws as well as who's participating in that function. And finally, the type of granting process. So application-based versus direct award for that granting process. There can be different types within that. So application-based, of course, is something that has an official application process. And the direct award doesn't. So those are factors that we looked at when we were doing this analysis. There's also several, if you look at the asterisk, it says direct award to specific organizations outlined in the bylaw. There are some grants where the bylaw specifically points to specific organizations, and there's only a few of those, and those are outlined in table A2 as well. Now we're going to get looking at the data, and the first one we're viewing here is very broad overview. It's CVRD, total annual grant funding over 5-year period. So you can see from this that there is a steady increase. It goes from about $1.14 million in 2019 to about $2.11 million in 2023. And you can just view with the colors. You see the category underneath that gives the colors. You can see green is associated with the social category. You can view, the different colors and see which ones related to which category. So we can view overall what's been happening with different types of grants with the assigned categories that we assigned. So that level of understanding, again, is very broad, but it helps us to see things from a big perspective. We can also look at counting grant category types. So the amount of grants or the number of grants per category, and that's what this shows. You'll see at the bottom that the count can go all the way up past 250, all the way almost to 300. And for social category, there's about 292 grants that have been given in that 5-year period. And it does stand out significantly more than the other types of grants. And why we maybe want to look at this, it could be, noticing that if there's larger grant counts, it could be associated with larger amounts of time spent on both financial and administrative processes for that grant. Especially if we look deeper into the grant type and we can see how much administration time is being spent on certain grants. This is a tree map, and in tree maps, it gives a great overview to be able to see relative amounts in comparison. So the different squares in this are the different functions. And we're just looking at social category for this grant analysis, this specific tree map. What we're looking at is we can see, if we look at the green, it shows function 451. And on the right, you'll see that function 451 is the homelessness support service. We also see that purplish color, 200 is victim services program. And the victim services program indicates it's the second largest amount that's been granted through that service over the period of 5 years, and so on and so forth. So this kind of diagram really indicates several things. One is you can see relative amounts for the different functions, but you can also see the amount of functions that have social grants coming from them. Now, some of them are, I guess you could say, a bit more official in nature, where the service or the function and the service that's been created is specifically for a social. And then moving forward, you may see some functions that give out social type grants that maybe aren't so directly, that people aren't so directly aware of. And this is one of the benefits of this type of analysis. We can also look at community facilities. I happen to choose the top two categories that were the highest or the largest for the 5-year period. So social and then community facilities. And when we look back on the original overall CVRD granting analysis for the 5 years, those were the top two or the top largest. So I chose this one. And whereas the one before, you can see that it had about maybe 22 different functions that were giving, social grants. This one only has about 8 for community facilities. And again, on the right, you can see I just listed the top 5 different functions and relative services that are associated with this. We can also take a look at very specific functions, just looking at trends in a specific function. So this is function 111, administrative management. Now this function, as you know, doesn't necessarily isn't set up to be an actual granting function, meaning with application base or necessarily annual. This is more used when there isn't availability of another function to get money from, or it can be used in maybe urgent situations, people delegating the board. Again, when there is not an alternative function or alternative service to be of use. So what we see for this is an interesting trend from 2019 to 2023. We see the increase. And then again, the categories in the green is social, and the purple is arts, culture, heritage, and in the red is environment. And I wanted to show an example of drilling down, because as you look at this, you can draw different conclusions, but you also can drill down and take a look at, well, what's a subcategory? In other words, are all the grants of the same type in the social category? So I did a little further looking into things and saw that many of the grants in the social category in the year 2019, 2020, 21, 2022 were actually COVID-19 related. To the extent that 64% of the grants in the social category for that whole time period of the 5 years were COVID-19 related. So it really helps to, again, give a visualization and an understanding of what's possible with viewing data and how we might look at it for, future awareness, for planning. How do we want to handle things of that nature in the future? Rural Community Grant Program, also formerly called Grants in Aid. This is from, again, over the 5 years. This is a different way to look at data, and it displays the function 120, 121, 122. And those are rural grant and aid or rural community grants for area A, B, C. And then 120, 123 and 124 combined. So that's Hornby and Denman Island combined in the last quadrant there. So this is a way, again, to present information. We can see that, you know, in general, 2023, for example, has been a significant year of funding in the social category for especially electoral area B, Lazo North, and electoral area C, which is Puntledge Back Creek. But it's overall, yeah, it could be useful to take a look at different aspects of viewing the data with categories. This is another way to look at data. It's not visual with a graph or a chart, but it's just presenting in a table format the top 5 organizations per year. So this is the highest total grant payments each year from 2019 to 2023. And the purpose of this is really, it has some utility at helping to look at when we look at potential partnership structures with organizations, you know, which ones are really standing out as something that we could look at the structure of how we work with them. It's also a way to take a look at how the information and the you know, it can be displayed in a different way other than just by graphs and charts. So with all that, it's a lot of data, a lot of information. And there's some questions for discussion that I think I'd like to ask. And is this helpful? Like, could data like this and reporting of this type be helpful to the board? How might it be helpful with decision-making or strategic planning? Is this something the board, you know, wants to see more of in those areas? What else could the data tell us? Is there something that you want analyzed further? Yeah, especially with granting processes, there's so many possibilities of things we can look at and that we could provide further information. So this is just the beginning, and we're just really taking an opportunity to show you what's possible. So I'd like to open it up to comments and thoughts about what you've seen and questions and so forth.
Great, thanks so much. And I can see there's some interest already, and I'll start off with Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the work involved in this. You've obviously done a lot of research, and the tables, I think, are useful. I just wanted to point out that the last one that listed the organizations that money had gone to, Comox Valley Transition Society was consistently high up there. They were acting as a recipient for the Coalition to End Homelessness. So I think it's important that we all are clear about that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth doing some reflection on this, and I mean, I'm struck with the number of areas where we're providing funding for issues, programs, and services that really fall under the responsibility, I think, of the province. And you know, while I've obviously supported a lot of these things, been in favor of them, I think that it's a worrying trend if we become an ongoing funder. And I think the pandemic probably enabled a number of organizations to start getting funding that, you know, might not have otherwise. And I think it's always worth our while to ask, is it in fact our role to be a core funder for some of the human service organizations in the community? I mean, we had another example tonight of an organization coming and asking us for $100,000. And, you know, personally, it's not my view that local government should be funding these programs. I think it's different if we're rising to the occasion when things are tough, and when there's things like a pandemic, and there's also other worthy organizations that simply don't get funding. But I think there's some real serious questions for us to look at here. So your analysis, I think, helps in that regard. Thanks.
Thanks very much, and I'll turn it now to Director Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for the report. It is really a lot of information, but all the variety of ways you've shared the information is really helpful. So thank you for that. Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a couple of things here, just responding to Director Hillian's comment about the responsibility of the province. 100% agree with that. And then there are gaps because the province is not funding these things, or they're funding them in a way that we may not support. I know of other specifically municipalities who have started to send invoices to the province for that work. That's an opportunity we might want to explore. I don't think the invoices are getting paid, but it makes the point that we are actually providing a service that the province is supposed to be providing. I really like, so part of what we've done in Cumberland, because we don't have much money, is create long-term partnerships with particular service organizations that are aligned with our strategic goals. And so we have 4-year agreements, and then that organization isn't constantly having to come back and request and provide all the work that goes into applying for funding is a barrier to getting funding. So the simplest and easiest way we can provide that funding, the better, in my view. And aligning it with our strategic priorities, I think, is also a critical piece of that, because then we're leveraging our community partners to do the work of our strategic priorities. And I just had a question. I want a little bit of clarity on so in chart number, I think it's chart number 4, function 111, so the administrative management funding, there's a big bump in arts and culture funding in 2023, and it looks like an anomaly to me. Is that just people coming out of COVID, like recovery stuff, or was it something else?
Yes, I can address that. I think I was gonna move back to that slide real quick. If it's, oh, there we go. Thank you, Lisa. Okay. Yeah, the purple, I think, is what you're referring to. Yeah. I knew someone would ask about that because it seems very conspicuous. So actually, the Hornby Island Arts Council, it was $175,000 worth of funding that supported their center, the building of their center. That's what that was.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. So.
Thanks, Michelle. And I have a question, but I'll ask that in a second. I'll go to Director McCollum first.
I don't mind going last either. Yeah, in terms of, help with decision making, I would definitely concur with some of the comments that have been made already, that I think when we're approached with a grant application for something that would seed the beginning of a new project or an initiative, that there's a case to be made for local government funding to support new work in the community. And I think that should be treated differently than when organizations come asking for operational support, because becomes a longer term relationship that, commits the current board, but also it is harder to change that once it's rolling. There's an expectation that the grant funding continues until there's a significant change. So I would like to see that kind of considered in a different way. Work that's in partnership with the work that the CVRD is doing that, overlaps with the initiatives that we've chosen to take on, or that's under our mandate as local government. Again, I think should probably have a different perspective than when we're being asked to fill in gaps. And that's a choice. There's a recognition that gaps exist, and sometimes, although we would like higher levels of government to address them, that we are willing partners because there's political will to step in. But I think we should be, again, taking a different approach to those type of funding requests. And then just looking at the data that's been presented, to me, there is two types of grants that are being, or there's another division between grants. And one is, the electoral areas are providing a lot of service function that exists in municipalities as part of a grant service. And that's was shown with the recreation facilities, this purple bar on this chart. Many of these things would not fall into a grant type of category were that service not in a electoral area. So I think having those things blended together kind of muddies a little bit what we're talking about, just because there are grants that the entire board participates in. And then there's a lot of grants, a significant amount of money, very significant, that is really just being provided within one service area. And so seeing those kind of all collated together for me, I'm not quite sure what to take away from it. So if we're to continue with, getting some kind of summary of data, I would probably suggest that we look at that differently, and then the EASC could provide direction on exactly how they would want their data that falls into that other category. So I hope that's all making sense. And then just one other small comment is social grants are the largest. And I would just suggest that we maybe change that to social development or social something, because social on its own doesn't quite capture what that funding is going towards. At least, I mean, I understood it, but I think if, we're communicating to the public and we're saying social, I don't know that it's completely clear. So just maybe adding development.
Thanks. And then the question I was going to ask is in some ways related to that. And it was looking at the bar graph that showed the number of applications and the kind of the dizzying number of applicants or grants in the social sector. And I'm just wondering, is that largely a consequence in terms of like trying to strip out the electoral areas from the overall? Is that large number largely a consequence of grants in the electoral areas where small amounts are being given out to different entities within each of the electoral areas? Would you say that the bulk of that very, very large number would be accounted for in that way?
Yeah, I would have to look at the data, because there's also, there's two ways to look at this. One is the number of grants and the other is the dollar amounts, right? And
Well, that's what
and
was
so
interesting,
that
yeah.
analysis is a great example of drilling down, like exactly how much here is due to what, and that could be done. And I would need to go and look at the data and do a drilling down and present it in a way where that it can pull that out, exactly how much of it is like from the electoral areas, I mean, rural community grant. Is that what you're referring to for that, or just in general?
Yeah, I just wanted to
Yeah.
have a bit more of an understanding, I think along
Yeah.
the lines of what Director McCollum was talking about, of it seems that the social development sector has more grants per $100,000, more grantees than by quite a wide margin than any of the other categories. I just wanted to understand more about why there were such a large number. And my suspicion is probably it's related to the the budgets to the electoral areas contributing to different organizations in there. But we have two hands up from the electoral areas, so maybe let's go to, I think, Director Arbor had his hand up first, and then Director Greaves. Director Arbor, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And that is a good piece of work. I think it's good to get an overview, and it almost gave me a flashback to the last 5 years, and all the different grants we've done in Area A. I had a question about one slide. It had McCullough Housing Society for 100 grand, and I was wondering if this was the Hornby development or some other contribution through the homelessness service. Yeah, in 2023, we have McCullough Housing Society. I know I committed 100 grand to the Hornby housing project, and it might have gone directly to Macola, but it's the first time that I would, probably Doug knows the answer to that, but it's the first time I see it represented anywhere, actually. Overall, yeah, I agree with my colleagues from before. I think it's two worlds in terms of the regional picture and the area specific picture. And I think Director Brown was touching on that in Cumberland. Like the economic development societies have been receiving, I don't consider them grants, I consider them contracts. They've been receiving these amounts for years, and they're both on 5-year contracts, or 3 years or 5 years, anyways, multi-year contracts. So some of these things I would look at and say, do I consider them grant, or I just consider them a service delivery partner, as Director Brown mentioned. And I think it would be useful to parcel that out in the future, because I think, especially at the board level, we're probably more interested in what we do as 6 jurisdictions working together, because my area probably accounts for a couple hundred of these grants. I've got multiple services and multiple community partners, and so that would kind of skew some of those pictures. Still useful to see, but I think I agree with my colleagues that having a report in the future for the EAs and one for what is the 6 jurisdiction doing together would be more useful. And then second, we have program money and capital money kind of all in the same baskets in a lot of these charts. And for me, they're very different deals, because especially when you were showing the chart with all the boxes, some of the big drivers in those amounts where are places where I really stuck my neck out on a capital project to attract federal funding and lever additional monies, right? So if you look at the Hornby Arts Council building, we started with 150,000 from community funds that were raised. The regional district put in 150,000, but the strategy was we now have a $1.5 million project. So it's very different than if I looked at some of those smaller amounts that are just programmatic and we just keep putting out every year. So overall, I'm just really happy this is happening, because I'm always pro data and pro analysis. But I think for future years, like, we could definitely, you're asking for feedback today, and I think you're getting it around how we might view it from this side of the table. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Director Orr. That was really useful. Director Green, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you, Director McCollum, for recognizing the fact that we do a lot of duplication of services that the greater region finances, much like the Rec Commission and what have you. You notice that Black Creek gets a fairly substantial whack of money all the time, but they have quite a program up there. It does, I think, muddy the water a little bit, throwing in the electoral areas with the region. We do have, as you probably realize, very defined services that are paid for strictly by say Area C or Area A or Damon or Hornby, and of course it's paid for through requisition from the citizens of those areas only. But then when we get together to do our grant funding, we tend to kibitz and pool some resources here and prop up some in somebody else's area as well. So we have a very active and cooperative way of allocating the funds. And I know that staff did recommend putting it through a meat grinder first and making sure it all checks out. But in a way, that's really not fair, because it's a changing landscape all the time. There are some funders that we have funded for decades, I guess, like all the Solom River enhancement, the Oyster River, the Little River, all the small environmental groups out there that kind of come to rely on us. So it's a little bit of a different kettle of fish, and we argue to keep it flexible, because when it comes right down to it, sometimes the electoral areas pay a disproportionate amount into, say, the hospital or the libraries or whatever, even the rec commission, and get very little back in their area as far as benefit for their citizens goes. So, you know, it's sort of like, leave us alone, it's working. So it's not as though we're spending money frivolously, but we work together on it. And it's one of those few things where we actually have discretionary dollars that the directors can actually spend money on the community, when we know very well what groups out there do need the financing, do need the help. So rather than putting it through the corporate meat grinders, I say, you know, it just leave us be. I think we're doing a really good job. I haven't heard anybody complaining about it out there. So, you know, it's not like it's a huge sum of money. I guess it adds up to probably about what, 400,000 total, but it's very much appreciated in the community. But it is odd throwing it in with the whole region and our budgets and our services and functions. It doesn't quite fit. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Grieve, and I'll go to Director Grant now.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I found this really interesting. Not really great with these graphs because I can't see the colors very well, so they kind of blend together. So it takes me a long time to go over them. But a couple of things that stood out to me was since 2019 until today, we've added $1 million, or almost doubled the amount of grants that we're giving out. Now, I get that that's over COVID and there's some rationale there, but it would be interesting to see how that plays out in the future. And I completely agree with Doug that we do take on a lot of things that I think are provincial, and other things that, you know, really, we have to really consider whether we want to get involved in those. I think what happens is we become the low hanging fruit sometimes. It's pretty easy to come here and ask for the money and we just give it to you, right? Whereas if you go to the province, there's a whole criteria you have to go through. And the other thing that I ask everybody that comes to our table is, where else have you been to try and get the money? Did you go to the province, or did you just show up here because we're pretty soft touches? So I think we need to put some better criteria in. We also ask for financial documents from them too. So do you really need the money? You know, we've had a couple of groups come and they just get it every year. So they just keep coming and asking, right? And so I think we need to really focus in a little more on where we're giving all this money to. And I totally agree with Doug that, you know, if it's a provincial obligation, we should think long and hard before we give them the money.
All right, this has been a great discussion, and hopefully that's provided some of the kind of feedback, and we're not done yet. Julian.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm just wondering if the role of our social planner, if an analysis like this will help us to shape that role going forward. And one of the things that occurs to me is that, and this might just be me, but that we want a social planner to be engaged with our community organizations, helping with some of the challenges that they have. And one of those challenges might be where to go for funds. So instead of us saying, sure, we'll give you $99,000, maybe our social planner sits down with the organization and helps them to work out a plan for sustainability. I think one of the challenges for nonprofits and social agencies is that if they chase too much, spend too much time chasing grants, they're not actually doing the work that that they're set up to do. And it may be that a social planning function helps to bring different organizations together to find efficiencies, to consolidate work plans, to avoid duplication. I've remarked several times about a meeting I went to with all the organizations in the community that do outreach, and it was standing room only. So, you know, it's an ongoing challenge to clarify who does what, and you know, whether they're all effective, and whether we should be spending money on all of them. So it just occurs to me that that's a role that our social planner could in fact be very helpful in supporting the community around. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Hill. And it's a great comment. I think so often there just isn't the capacity there to see the big picture, or to know how to develop a plan like that. And it could be a very valuable contribution we could make. Thank you so much for the report. I hope you feel that there's been lots of input. I hope it's been valuable and it's going to sort of feed helpfully into the next iteration of this. I think this is simply for receipt. So
Actually, Mr. Chair, that was part one.
Okay.
Michelle provided the data and the analysis, and then Lisa, I think you're going to walk us through the Appendix B, which is at the very end of the staff report. That is the framework, very much in draft, and part of the discussion already here is going to be helpful to fill out part of that draft. But I think Lisa, you're going to walk through
Okay,
the rest of that and have some more dialogue.
okay, great.
Great. Thank you. And thank you so much for your feedback. That's exactly what we were looking for. And thanks to Michelle for her hard work in putting all that forward. And certainly, as I mentioned, this is a sort of a cross branch initiative and working with Lucy and her team and understanding what kind of information we need to be collecting from folks that are asking for funds or applying for funds, so that we can start tracking some of this stuff. Will be a work in progress, definitely. I'm smiling right now because a lot of what you were talking about really feeds into establishing a framework for what we're doing. And so, Lisa, if you could put up the document. The outline, yes, please. Yeah, so what we've done here is we have drafted an outline for a community partnerships and grants framework. And this is really a document for the board. We're looking for feedback on what would help you in addressing some of the things that you've brought up through a discussion on the grants analysis. So a framework can support the board and staff to make informed decisions when community organizations request resources or funding support. Consider practical applications and pressures of providing various levels of support on CVRD's staff and financial resources. Identifying and evaluating opportunities to leverage CVRD resources, which was discussed already. It can be proactive in working with organizations and groups as partners and collaborators where alignment exists. It can be responsive and adaptive to changing needs. And it can create an evaluation mechanism to strengthen and create greater consistency in our existing grant, as well as the partnership arrangements. And I think really it's also a way to be really transparent with our community organizations, provide information to them and manage expectations as they come to the board. So I'll just walk through sort of these areas. And again, this is an outline for a document. So it's what we have determined would be useful, looking to you for further comment on, are these sections useful? Is there something that's missing that would really help further? So obviously just an introduction and the document was set the stage, provide the rationale for the framework and why it's being developed. Definitions are key because they establish collective understanding and a unified language for terms used in the framework, but also across CVRD's work. So as much as this is a document that can support the board, it can also support the staff. And we're working from the basis of common language. I think it's important to point out the CVRD's mission. That's what grounds the work that we do. It grounds you in your strategic direction. Number 4 is a CVRD commitment. So what is it that we're doing in this framework? So this is just an example that's there, and that can be modified if there's a feeling that a commitment and a stated commitment around a framework and around the idea of supporting community through grants and partnerships is important. Next page. Guiding principles. Guiding principles, as we all know, are our touch points. They ground and guide the work within the document. So those are some examples of the types of principles. We've mentioned them already. We're already looking at working it from a place of equity, transparency, and accountability. There may be other principles there that we can consider there. The next, we're getting into a little bit of sort of practical space, and that is outlining how CVRD provides supports. So I've given sort of 6 areas here, 5 areas, very high level. We do a lot of work. We range our work with community ranges from funder, leader, collaborator, to advocate and many other roles in between. So this isn't an exhaustive list here. It's just an example. Community funding, third-party grant application where we apply to agencies on behalf of organizations, financial administration, project management, and advocacy. Section 7 is a key piece, and this is really where we can bring forward an assessment tool. And it's the purpose of this is not to be really rigid. It's a guide, and it can help the board with a conversation in consideration of what the request that's being brought forward. So we'll look at internal as well as external conditions that may impact the board's decision. So we've got the ones that I've mentioned here, but some of the other pieces that I've heard around the table already tonight is around leveraging. Is it an opportunity to seed an opportunity or an idea in the community? What is a provincial obligation? Are we filling a gap here? Is this incremental funding, or are we actually replacing funding that may already be out there? So this assessment tool is something that we would probably, it would take a little while to get to a place that the board is comfortable with, but I think it's a key aspect of this framework. It will also help in being very transparent to organizations that are coming forward to know what the board is going to consider when they bring forward their requests. The last 2 pieces on that page there are around the life cycle. So it's a partnership life cycle and a grant life cycle. And this is a flow chart, really. For example, in a partnership life cycle, there's discovery, the development of the partnership, the animation of the partnership, and the review of the partnership. What a life cycle really provides is that, and I heard it mentioned earlier tonight, is it gives you guidance from the beginning and possibly to the end. Sometimes we're not sure how to conclude our support. Whereas if we look at if we ground our policy and processes in the life cycles and the flow charts, then we can find our way sometimes to revamp, to refresh, and sometimes to conclude. Next page. These are practical pieces continuing here, and that's just a monitoring and evaluation. Right now, we have certain points that we do monitor. We request on some areas and some grants reporting, others we don't do that. So this can provide the board and the staff some area of consistency or consideration on when we should be monitoring and evaluating, especially as it relates to the partnership and the grant life cycle. We can look for a place here with policies and procedures relevant to board processes. And we can also outline implementation tools so the board can maybe, as it's considering a partnership or it's considering grant support, can look at ways that we may be able to implement that support, whether that's through existing application-based programs, whether that's a service-based contract, MOUs, or perhaps looking at adjudication committees that may provide community input into our processes. And then the last 3 pieces here are really commitments that the framework will offer externally. So communications and engagement, it's really great to see the grants analysis up there. How much of that do we actually communicate out to community? How much does community know the story of what we're providing, whether that be in the electoral areas or in our communities, and how we're supporting them? And what are those stories of successes and challenges that we have helped out? So I think really having a commitment to that communications and engagement piece around our support. Identifying areas in community conversations where staff or directors would benefit from building partnerships, building relationships that can only strengthen our support. And then I think the last one there, which was also brought up, is around a commitment to capacity building. So can the framework help outline ways that we may be able to support organizations to build their capacity so they may not be so reliant on our support systems, such as mechanisms for grant writing, strategic planning, governance development, and technological support. So that's the framework that we have, the outline that we have proposed. the questions that we ask are there any sections that should be added or removed or enhanced? And specific to the assessment tool, how would you see yourselves using that assessment tool?
Thanks, Lisa. And I got a question from Director Grant.
I'm just wondering, this may pertain to the last bit, but do we have a thought of timing for these? Like for us, if people come while we're doing our budget, it's a lot easier than if they come 2 weeks before the event and go, hey, we need some money, because we don't have any money at that point, right? So, you know, for us, if you're gonna come and ask us for money, then come while we're doing our budget, because at least we can be prepared for it at that point.
Okay, and Director Arbor.
Starting to have a sad realization that, maybe not sad, he seems pretty happy that in 10 years or 15 years from now, I might be sitting at this table and I'll sound exactly like Dr. Grieve. I am quite concerned about the first page, because that's a persistent problem, I think, at the CVRD or in our staff or just general public. The EAs were like our own municipalities in a way. You know, we're hosted under the CVRD, and I wish I could take a USB of my brain and download it to the staff working on this, because I think there's some political naivety and it's it's not naivety, it's actually just lack of knowledge of what drives a lot of these granting decisions and those partnerships in the communities. And the one that really ticked me off, because I brought it up before at rural areas, and I have to speak about it today, the thought that I would apply the CVRD strategic priorities as a funnel for what's happening in the areas and the partnerships we build is crazy. Like it's grassroots up in Area A, right? The community identifies needs, we answer them. If I start to layer on like the lenses of the CVRD and all those things, you know, it just won't work with what the actual needs of the communities are. I see the corporate priorities of the CVRD as important, especially the lenses around our core driver to the services we deliver. But I see very much the granting and the partnership on the ground as quite different. Dr. Brown talked about how in Cumberland, there is alignment between the Cumberland strategy and their strategic partners, say Cumberland Community Forests or whatever. So I have my own mini strategic plan for Area A in the collaboration and relationships with the organizations in the area and what they find is important. You know, even just from Union Bay, I was in Union Bay for a mural this weekend, and all of a sudden there's a couple of new projects that are coming up that will probably end up falling in our rural grant cycle. And they're not related to, well, one of them is definitely not related to our strategic priorities, but they're still nonetheless important because we are their local government. We have one on the agenda today from a request for support further down on the board agenda. It's a great example of, you know, the Hornby Island Resident Ratepayers Association looking for some support through us to be a sponsor of a grant. So I think I understand why staff is trying to bring a framework, which is good. You're trying to bring order to what is pretty unwieldy. But my feedback on the framework is it's going to have to leave a lot of flexibility for what will remain unwieldy, which is the lifeblood of the communities. That is quite different from corporate concerns. Yeah, but otherwise, yeah. So I would say at minimum, my request would be next time this gets brought up, bring it back to the ESC framework for a discussion, and have one for the board. And I think you'll have two quite different conversations at both tables. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Arbor and Director Hellion.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I do see it being different for the area considerations as opposed to the larger board. And I wonder whether or not the more than setting up criteria for how we respond to grants, whether it's about clarifying what our role is in this process. And, you know, again, I hearken to the role of the social planner, which is a recognition that we do play a role in the larger community. And we've seen, you know, large scale initiatives, some of which mandated by the province, like the housing assessment, the poverty reduction strategy, the accessibility strategy. These are big picture projects that I think the social planner would be engaged in and would help with tremendously. And I think there's going to be ongoing need for that type of big picture engagement. But I wonder whether the issue of people approaching us for grants, particularly in the social sphere, you know, might better be served by us deciding, okay, this is how much money we want to put into this, and let's do such as the city of Courtenay is now doing by giving that money to the community foundation, which then gives it out based on applications to them. And it takes it out of the administrative task of both staff here dealing with it and also us, you know, having to determine who's a valid recipient and who isn't. And an organization like the Community Foundation, which is pretty much set up to do that, we could give them our criteria and, you know, give them 200,000 a year or whatever, and, you know, they would give it a, that's another option. I mean, there's always going to be emerging issues. Hopefully there aren't going to be emerging massive crises like the pandemic, but you never know. We could have an earthquake here, and Lord knows what sort of requests for funding would start coming forward to local government. So I think there has to be, you know, where there remains some flexibility at the larger board table. I would prefer that we had some way of allocating an amount and then getting it out of our hands as to who actually gets it. And leave the areas to do what they do based on how they do it, because I 100% agree with what the area directors have said so far. They basically operate as you know, the local government of their electoral areas, and they respond to those areas based on the needs that arise, and they've got historical relationships and ongoing commitments that they know best. So those are just my thoughts tonight. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Director Hillian. I had similar thoughts in terms of the approach that's been taken with limited sum delegated to the Community Foundation. But we'll go to Director Brown.
Thanks. That's some good ideas, Director Hillian. I also agree that the areas may need to be separated out, although I think they have a lot of money that they give out, and I don't want to limit the funding capacity we have. So having worked in the nonprofit sector for an exceedingly long time, I think part of the role of our social planning position, and I think this is already happening likely, is to partner with nonprofits to help them build capacity to get more money and figure out what they're doing, strategic planning, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe we don't do that work ourselves. Maybe we partner with the Community Foundation to do that work, or some other organization that is good at doing that work. And I also just wanted to put a plug in for the partnership granting program where we might provide consistent funding to an organization that is supporting our strategic outcomes in some way for multiple years, I think is one way of doing good partnerships. And then, but I wouldn't want that to be our only mechanism for funding organizations, because there are always emerging items and emerging new ideas. And so having two streams where one is a one-time or seed granting or whatever, and the other is more like, you're helping us achieve these goals, and so we're going to give you operational funding or whatever, some longer term commitment. And maybe my question is, if we did take the area association, the areas out of the equation, do we have a number, like off the top of your head, of where that the balance of the granting that we do is, like how much is going through the areas and how much is going through the water board.
Yeah, that is something that we have to come back and because I have to go back through the data and sort it and filter it
Yeah.
and, you know, all that good stuff.
Do it all over again.
But it's not hard to do. But with your direction on that, it can easily be done and I can come back. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we have Director Kerr.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I agree with the comments so far. I just want to share how I had a bit of a different take on the funds provided by the electoral areas, because I really think what the directors are doing, the electoral area directors are doing, is consistent with our strategic plan, specifically the one named community partnerships. So, you know, it reads in our strategic plan: the social fabric of our communities and the health and well-being of citizens depend on solid and sustainable community partnerships. Collaboration and support are ever present in guiding our service delivery. So when Director Arbor, Grieve, or Hardy, they see a community group that needs some support and it's a community partner, and they're able to advocate for that group and provide them with the funding, I think that is totally consistent. And I think, you know, the tying it to our strategic plan isn't to limit, it's really to say, yes, keep doing what you're doing. It's consistent with the strategic plan. With that being said, it does provide some very loose guardrails. Like if a group was doing something that wasn't fiscally responsible, it was contrary to our relationship with Comox First Nation, and wasn't promoting equity and inclusion, then that might not be a program that the electoral areas want to support. So I think it's yes, and you're still doing that, and the community partnerships piece is really important. So I think not tying it to our strategic plan, which is what is directing the entire work of the organization, would be a mistake as well. So yeah, keep up the great work.
All right. So at this point, Lisa and Michelle, do you feel you've got some good feedback to take into next steps of the process? And seeing no further lights, I should just never say that. Director Hillian.
Well, thanks, Chair. It just occurs to me that the recommendation maybe isn't totally in line with what we've been talking about tonight, and that maybe it makes sense for staff to, you know, consider what we've been talking about and come back with that analysis based on the areas versus the wider region.
We're still on item 7, which is just proceed.
Oh, we're still on item 7?
Yeah, no, it is remarkable, but yeah, we are. We'll all try and be more concise, I think, on item 8, but yeah, we're still on 7.
No, I thought we were on 8.
Yeah, you're not opposed to receipt, are you?
No,
okay,
totally
excellent.
not. Sorry.
That was what I was about. Anyone opposed to receipt? That passes, and now we'll go to item number 8. I'll pass it over to our CEO to get things started, but yeah, perhaps we'll be more concise on this round.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Jake Martins, General Manager of Corporate Services, will be introducing the staff report on some member feedback related to a potential or possible social development grant service. Yeah, admittedly, there is some overlap to the previous item, and some of that conversation may inform part of what you deliberate around Jake's presentation here on the social development grant service. So, Jake.
Thank you, James, and good evening, board of directors. Yes, so Michelle and Lisa provided actually, I'm good, don't need the clicker, thanks. They provided a great flyover of kind of the corporate granting activities for the whole organization. And of course, with this now report, we're going to zoom way down, much closer to earth here, and talk specifically about one slice of the social development pie that Michelle kind of alluded to, and that is the regional grants that are then coming from the administration and general government functions. So just those, no confusion between electoral area and municipality. Everyone pays into this, everyone has been paying into it, and everyone will continue to pay into this. It's what we grant and how we structure those grants. So this report itself, I appreciate it's been a bit of a meandering topic over the last number of years, but ultimately it reports the board's strategic interest around the provision of grant funds or the potential provision of grant funds for social development organizations to support their work in the community. So you've directed this over the last series of years to consider this, and so we've been actioning that. And this interest, of course, has also been driven by the requests for community funding that have came forward. And so this evening's delegation was perhaps one example of it, but there's been many over the years seeking funds for regional activities or that are perceived to be regional benefiting activities that would be funded by all participants of the regional district. So in addition to those requests that have been coming in, we've also been actively advancing our understanding and our activities around social development. And so we've noted them in the report. It's got highlighted, I think, here just a few minutes ago, our completion of the poverty reduction assessment, our completion of a scoping study around a potential social development service, our community partnerships framework that has just been presented, and of course, the bringing on of a social planner position. Last year, the board resolved to seek feedback from each of your member jurisdictions around this potential service concept for a social development grant. And it took some time, but we did get all of those responses now in hand. So we've tried to summarize in the staff report what that overall feedback has been. Of note, while there is some interest, there is not overwhelming or overall support for a regional grant service. But this lack of support could certainly mean the end of this chapter. But given that you've been consistently funding approximately around $30,000 a year out of that function, that regional function, we think it warrants further consideration by the board to determine how you want to proceed in the years going forward. So with that noted, we've kind of pointed to 3 available approaches for grant funding outlined in the staff report. The one is kind of the tried and true. We've got approximately 100 different services established by a service establishment bylaw. It's the framework that the provincial government has set up for regional districts. It's what we typically and always try to default to, given there's all kinds of good rationale for that framework. But there are other alternatives here. The second is the establishment of a policy. This has been undertaken by a number of regional districts around the province. Similar to the rural grant and aid programs, where some of those have been established by essentially a policy under your sort of corporate powers to provide community benefit. So not through a service establishment bylaw. And the last is kind of the way we've been treating these over the last few years, where you've been providing one-time kind of grant funds, although those one-time have kind of turned into consecutive years. That's meant to really address an emergent issue or some sort of topic that, you know, is a one-time need. So that lack of kind of full support for a new service, combined with your allocation of the, you know, approximately $30,000 a year, has led us to put forward this recommendation tonight around establishing a small scale grant and aid established by policy. So this would be a tax neutral proposal, if you will, given your allocations over the last number of years. And with that, I kind of want to acknowledge, you know, 2 key pieces to this recommendation. One is that the bulk of those funds that have been provided have been going to one single entity. And so if you go down this path of creating a grant program, we would of course be inviting applications from the community. The previous report noted approximately over 200 nonprofit organizations in the community. So we expect, like many grant programs, it will be oversubscribed. There's a small amount of dollars, so awarding a large sum to one group may be challenging. That kind of leads into the other challenge, which is recognizing that adjudicating grant programs is generally one of the most difficult tasks a council or a board does. And we've seen many struggles around the province, and we've seen hours and hours and comments from certain elected officials saying that's the toughest decision every year we make is around where those grant funds go to. So we want to recognize that. But appreciate that what we're trying to achieve here is a more equitable framework, enable that role clarity between what's a regional benefiting service and how you should be funding that from a regional function then, and reduce that piecemeal approach, which we know some groups are facing, where they're having to go to each elected body to seek funds for what is the regional task. So with that, Mr. Chair, welcoming comments and feedback on this, and look forward to moving this item forward.
Great, thanks, Jake. And why don't we go to Director Arbor, please?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Jake. I think I'm one of the members who expressed no interest in a new service, and I don't think that's changed. In my case, I think people are aware. They keep hearing me that there's, until I know if South Sewer is going or not, I cannot join a service when I don't know if the balance of power will lead it to become something way bigger. And we've heard that from different jurisdictions in the past, mostly Comox, but we've definitely heard that before. So that's my tune. I'm facing massive tax increases, and I just can't take the risk. So I do want to continue to support regionally social organization, but on a one-off, one by one basis, as we've done. That keeps control for me of the budgets and contributions from Area A to those initiatives. And I don't believe it's been that broken that we need to go a bit like, I still support some services that have aggregated, like emergency services. There's things where it clearly makes sense, but for this one, when you say it's a hard job for elected official to make those decisions, well, we don't have that hard of a job. So if it's hard sometimes, that's fine. That makes us sweat and think things through and think about what's a good project, in our eyes that we'll be willing to defend to our community members. So, yeah. But if obviously other partners might want to decide to go ahead and who knows, if Satsur doesn't happen, maybe I'll join later. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that perspective, Director Arbor, and we'll go now to Director McCollum.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is definitely a tough one. I can basically see an issue with every single possibility, which I guess is why there's not really a clear path forward. One thing, I would be even okay with a higher amount in option one if we restricted it in a way that organizations applying for it could not apply. They would be committing to not seeking funding from other local government in the region, and that would include the electoral areas grant and aid, but also going to the various city councils. This is one of the challenges that we have is we get asked, and then the question is inevitably, well, are you going to ask, the other? And then sometimes they come to this board and the city of Courtenay has committed funds, and then we also contribute here, so. And this is part of why the response from the city of Courtenay is like, we need to look at the whole picture. And then, tonight we got a lot of great data and information on what is happening at the CVRD, which then did include the electoral areas, but leaves out the municipal picture. So if there was some magical way to address that, I think there would probably be an appetite to even see more than 30,000. 30,000 won't go very far. So I'm in support of that, with that caveat that organizations limit their ask to that single point of contact. And for things that come up that are more complex and longer term, I think that leaving the possibility for number two, where we do from time to time set up another small service because a need has emerged that there's political support for. I don't see a problem with that, and that would be a one-off decision anyway, so I don't think we need to cross that off the list. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Right. Director Brown, you look poised. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I love giving away money, so I'll start with that. And I recognize that it's a slippery slope, and I also concur with the note that people come here and then they go to Cumberland and Comox and Courtenay. And wouldn't it be nice if they just had to do one delegation and get what they needed? And since we're already we're consistently giving out $30,000. I mean, we're going to continue to do that in a way. So maybe we need a framework to do that that's reasonable and makes those decisions easier. And so I'm wishy-washy on it, I guess. That's where I'm at.
Well, maybe I'll ask a question. This is, we were discussing the previous round on item 7, the idea of something of perhaps outsourcing this $30,000 to the community foundation. I was wondering what initial thoughts had been by staff, what the initial sort of thinking was on that as an option. It does sort of remove some of the burden on staff and some of the kind of the political games that can occasionally happen with these things.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. So we had contemplated that in the 2 service concepts that we had sent to the municipalities and the electoral areas for feedback as a certainly a totally viable option. And as it's been noted tonight, the city of Courtney has undertaken that approach. So if the board gave direction to go down what we're recommending here, we could certainly bring back information on the possibility of that being your method for distributing those funds. And we've had experience with utilizing the community foundation as well, and appreciate there's opportunities for those funds to be leveraged, and that is the primary function of that organization, to distribute funds. So there's some advantages there, but we could at least bring back that information to the board and allow you to consider if that's the direction you want to go with this.
If this recommendation ends up being put on the floor, would looking into the community foundation as a possibility, and perhaps incorporating Director McCollum's suggestion of, it being, if you go here, you don't go everywhere else. Are those things if the recommendation were to be on the floor, you would want added specifically, or?
Yeah, it's helpful for us to hear this feedback now so that we can take that in and bring back something that hopefully reflects what you're seeking. So yes, if that's an interest of the board, we can certainly look to bring back information on that option, and then let the board consider that with the other option to essentially stick handle it yourself through adjudication as you have with some of your other services. In terms of kind of requirements around groups seeking funding from other local governments, I think that also requires some diligence on all of our local governments to say application comes in, say thank you, but that actually needs to go to the regional district or to XYZ organization that may be administering their regional grant function. So, but we can certainly try and encourage groups as much as possible not to do that, but definitely would require on our part as local governments to forward those along.
Okay, thanks, Jake. We'll go to Director Kerr in a second.
Yeah, this will be brief. That's kind of my point. This is really about efficiencies. We don't want these poor community organizations from doing the train, going around to seeing all of the different municipalities, making the same request. That's inefficient. It's also an efficient use of council time in all of the municipalities. It's also an efficient use of this board's time to be deciding on 3,000 here, 2,000 there, etc. So my preference is we have a regional service that each group contributes to. Like we said in our letter from Comox, our council said there's got to be some kind of a cap, or we can't be expected to go up and up and up without approval from each of the participating services. And then there's a one-stop shopping for the groups. And if we set a criteria, whether it's based on our strategic plan or other criteria, then it doesn't even need to be voted on by the elected officials, unless, of course, it's for like final approval. So we can delegate that responsibility, more efficient all around. And that was longer than I intended it to be, but hopefully you get the point.
All right, thanks, Director Carr. And we're going again to Director Arbor, and I think just because of the time, we'll obviously try and just keep ourselves succinct, but please go right ahead.
I'm always succinct. It's a cultural thing. Compared to most French people, I'm very brief. In regards to, it reminds me of the rec pass, all of the attempts, because right now people have to buy their pass from all the different centers and blah, 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 right? And then we've had this multi-year effort, starting with the low-income pass. I was talking to somebody this weekend who was telling me, when is the Valley going to amalgamate so that everything is more efficient and simple? And I said, well, Courtney wants to, but none of the other jurisdictions are really into it. That would be the ultimate efficiency. In the meantime, the conversation is worthwhile, but I think if you can find a hybrid model where it's a bit like the rec pass, you have a one-stop shop, save people a bit of time. At least in the area, you hit 3 jurisdictions at one. You hit area A, B, and C if you come to ESC, but I empathize with the groups that have to do the tour for sure, but I fear more the potential of a service that grows, even with a cap. I thought, for example, that anyways, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Director Arbor. And I'm not seeing any further, I am, every time I say that, Director William, there you go, please go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was hesitating speaking last. I thought I was on number 9 this time, but I'd actually, I just want to float this first. I'd be prepared to move that we direct staff to investigate the possibility of a social development grant service administered by the Community Foundation that the regional district contributed to, and that we deal with it that way. That would actually be my preference, that that groups that are looking for money for social development and such things, when they come to the city of Courtenay or the regional district, are told we provide X amount of money every year to the Community Foundation. You're welcome to apply there, but there's no point in you coming to us. Unless it's something exceptional that is in response to a community crisis like a volcano erupts in Cumberland or something. To me, that's clean, organized. It cuts out this need for organizations to go hand in hand to every group in the valley. And I think really the only thing that we would need to debate is, how much money would we put into it, and what would be the vehicle for doing it. So that would be the sort of motion that I would propose, and I don't know whether there's any support for it, but I'm just floating that just in case. Thanks.
Is that it was a very, very long one, but was that a motion in the middle of there somewhere? Like, it's roughly to the effect of what you just said.
Well, have we passed receipt? Oh, go ahead.
No, we haven't dispensed with receipt. Did you have a point of order, Richard? Director? Oh, of course, yeah. And you're right, we haven't dispensed with receipts, so we'll save that thought for a moment.
I appreciate the comments that Director Helene has put forward with regards to suggestion and the funds go into a pot and then somebody turns around and decides based upon the applications, here's where the money's going to flow. And I guess, again, looking at it from an electoral areas services committee perspective is, again, this money that gets put into a pot gets weighed upon, and there's 30 applications that come from the city of Courtenay. There's 2 that come from area B, and the city of Courtenay gets the majority of the funds, and area B maybe gets 1 application filled, or maybe they don't get any filled this year, and good luck next year. So I guess that would be my only concern with regards to the idea and the suggestion. I like the idea with regards to, let's put it in this bucket and somebody else deals with it and it's not the politicians. That would be easy. But like I said, I guess my concern is at the end of the day, when we start looking at a situation where area A, B, or C, or Village of Cumberland kind of their applications don't get recognized because it's always based upon a majority, that we might run into some problems there. So I'm just trying to understand how we can avoid that if we go down that road. Thanks.
Jake, did you want to try and?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So certainly one of the stipulations with this, whether it's administered by the CVRD or whether it was funds were provided to another organization to distribute, is that there would need to be a clear rationale and demonstration that is of regional benefit with what they're applying for. And I think that to me is certainly central in this whole conversation. And if you don't have that clear demonstration, well, then it erodes the whole foundation that I think what we're talking about here. So albeit I can appreciate that is sometimes hard for a group or any individual to absolutely make certain that the programs and services that funding are going to are of regional benefit, but that it's a key consideration in this whole conversation.
Thanks, Jake. And I guess if one were, did you have a follow-up you want to ask? Okay, well, let me just make sure.
And I'm trying to, and thank you through the chair to staff. And I understand, again, when we look at that bucket and we look at the rationales, what's the best bang for the buck? And that's my concern from an electoral area services committee is, well, this this bang for the buck is gonna benefit the city of Courtney, who has a population of 60,000. Best bang for the buck for area B is a population or say area A, for Royston is 3,000 people. So if we're comparing apples to apples, there's no way area A is gonna get that application fulfilled. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is I get and understand the point of what's the best benefit for the residents in the whole entire Comox Valley. But again, we need to also look at what are the best benefits for area A, B, or C, or Village of Cumberland. And I just use the Village of Cumberland as an example, same as A, B, and C, but that's the concern. And like I said, I understand the idea and the concept. It's just, how do we make sure that there's fair and equitable opportunities for the smaller communities when it comes or smaller groups for these applications? I give you an example with regards to area B, the Therapeutic Gardens out off of Anderton Road, and that benefit of that contribution to that little park, and what that does for the folks in area B, but also the town of Comox, is people will hop on a bus and go down and spend an afternoon there. But again, we run into an outreach program such as the folks that came in here today, and they go, wow, like what's the better benefit if we're looking at it? You know, what's the best bang for your buck? And I'm going, well, that would probably be the best bang for the buck, right? So those are things that, like I said, I'm just concerned about with regards to who's doing that evaluation and the different groups and stuff that we're looking at tangible benefits for everybody at the end of the day, I guess.
Thanks. That's, you had your finger poised. Do you have something you want to add?
Just to recognize the importance of that criteria and making sure that it does reflect that regional benefit, that valley-wide benefit, as opposed to any one particular jurisdiction or area. That the valley-wide benefit is what I'm hearing is important. And of course, none of this is taking away from the rural community grants or the other granting programs. This is really narrowly focused around the social development grants. But the criteria, I think, is what's most important, and that's what, if the board supports this recommendation or a version of it, we would come back with a policy that tries to articulate that criteria.
The criteria is important, and possibly Director Hardy taking it out of the hands of the people around this table and giving the professionals who've been given clear guidelines, that maybe that's a possible way around it. But
I think we had one point of clarity. Jake and I were looking at each other, and I think it was to Director Hillian's possible suggested motion here as we go forward. And you mentioned a social development grant service administered by Community Foundation. Is it under the same guise of the regional grant and aid program for social development services through our function 111? I think that was the distinction we were looking for.
Yeah, just appreciating that you could direct us to go down of seeking to establish this a formal, typical service like we do in many other cases, or you could ask us to go away and come back with details, draft policy, and options for the delivery of that through, again, the alternative mechanism that we're proposing here, which is a policy, not a bylaw, I suppose, right? And so just that clarity, I think we're interested in.
okay, so what I'm going to suggest is Director Morton's been incredibly patient, waiting for a chance to speak. After that, I think we'll just call receipt. And then if there is a motion being put forward by Director Hillian, he can clarify the answer to that question. So Director Morton, thanks for waiting.
Great. Well, you know, sometimes it's good to be patient because a couple of my questions were answered. One of them was around the criteria and having a regional focus and that being demonstrated. So that was one of the questions. And would the EA still be able to do their own thing? It sounds like those rural community grants would still be there. I definitely support some rendition of Director Hillian's idea for motion. I think it would be good to send it away to staff to come up with, you know, some options around the concept rather than kind of narrowing in on a specific focus today. And I do, just going back to the previous conversation, I do like the idea of staff, there being some role of advocating for those nonprofits that are not used to these kind of funding. You know, we can all name off quite a few nonprofits who come to us that are really looped in and understand how this all works. And for them to have to go to community foundation, they're going to be able to pivot really easily. They're going to be able to figure that all out, but there might be others that need some more help to make sure that they don't get lost in the shuffle and lose out because they're not as, they don't have as much capacity or experience or any of those things. So I support that advocacy piece. And then I guess just going back to that question or that comment around the provincial role, you know, whatever we decide to do, I think we need to have a discussion around that. And I don't know what that looks like exactly, but you know, do we quarterly send a list to the province of, you know, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we give out that they should be funding? You know, like there has to be some conversation, I think, around Director Greaves looking really confused about what I'm saying, but you know, I think that is something that we're also grappling with, because we take away all the money. Like, it's all well and good to say the province should be funding it, but if we don't fund it, then what do we see? Then we get more emails, we get, you know, there's a cost to not funding these things as well. So in general, I'm in support of the motion that Director Hillian has described, but I do think it needs to go back to staff for a lot of, a lot of fleshing out of the details. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. And as Director Grieve, I don't believe you have had a chance to speak yet. Why don't you go, and then we'll deal with receipt after that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's I don't think the need has ever been greater, and it's only going to get worse. Cost of living, affordability, all the social, societal problems that are associated with housing and food and all the rest of it. Disconcerting though, when you talk about looking to senior government, there's a proposition before the electorate in the state of California. A friend of mine is from California. Basically, Governor Newsom wants to download all housing issues to municipal government. That's the way to get out of it, you see, then it's not their problem. So it's, I think, I look back to when my colleague next door here, Jonathan, was first elected, and he was at the social planning committee and talking about, you know, money for this and that. And I said, well, you know, if you're expecting to get tens of thousands of dollars, you can come to local government. But if you want millions of dollars, you have to knock on that big door. And we're still in that position where, you know, we're looking to senior government. Why? Because, you know, we exist on here we go again. We exist on 6 to 8% of the total tax dollar. Out of that, it comes from property taxes. Out of the property taxes, only 60% of people actually own property. So we don't have any other mechanisms. And this was a big issue at FCM this year, was to asking the government to give us more revenues for taxation to do all the stuff that we're being downloaded on. And, you know, same thing's going on in England right now, as you know, they're having the same, and we're stuck in a 19th century tax model based on property value. But I do think that the wise thing here is, because this is such a complex issue, and because in our hearts, we really care about our communities because we're so close to them. We have friends and family that are suffering. So I think the best thing would be to send us, defer this back to staff for some more consideration. If we can come up with some kind of a compromise, because like a famous Jewish philosopher once said, the poor will be with us always.
Okay, thanks for that big picture kind of analysis of things. I can see people are itching to put solutions on like recommendations up. Director Grant, I know you're a big fan of concise meetings and brevity, so I'll let you do one question before we go to receipt.
Just wanted to delay us for a bit. Yeah, I guess for me, I'm kind of with Daniel on this one, where I see this starting as a small, fairly innocuous function and then just growing and growing and growing. And so the things that would bother me would be the funding and how we can stop that. And then when it does come to funding, the governance, it's got to be fair for everybody. When you come back and say, okay, we need more money in that. If you have one group that can dominate that, they can just spend your money like crazy and you get no say in it. And that's why we don't get into services, by the way, is because we just get tired of that. So that's a big issue for us, and it will continue to be. So unless there's a governance model and a funding model that works, I don't know where that'll go in our town, but you know, I think it'll be a little bit more difficult than some of the others.
Okay, thanks, Director Grant. And I think that definitely the governance funding model is something I hear everyone talking about. So I think, yeah, staff probably are taking note of that. So a motion for receipt. Anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none. And if anyone cares to make a recommendation or a resolution, Director Hillian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I move that staff be directed to prepare a report regarding potential policy and criteria for collaborating with the Community Foundation to administer limited social development funding. And if I could speak to that, I think that this could include options for the electoral areas to not be part of it or not. You know, it'd be nice to see the breakdown in such a report of how much the electoral areas are funding versus what the rest of what the larger board is doing. And, you know, as I said earlier, I would totally support the electoral areas continuing to do their thing independent of something like this. To me, this is a vehicle for the various organizations that come to the regional district looking for money to say, here's where we've put our money. This is the application process, and there's an administrative structure there that that basically does this and does it on behalf of the entire community, and I think does a pretty decent job. So that's my proposal. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Director Hillian. And just so we know what we're kind of discussing, I would assume that staff would take from the conversation that a governance model is extremely important, and that would be part of the policy referred to in Director Hillian's resolution, and also the sorry, I'm blanking on something on why don't I just pass it on to Director Brown, but be interesting maybe perhaps at the end, Jacob, before we vote, if you could talk about what you've heard and what you would be sort of taking with you to the work on that resolution. Thanks. And Director Brown.
I was hoping you were going to say funding limit. So whether that's 30 or 50 or 20,000.
Are you proposing an amendment or because that's a fairly specific thing? Sorry.
Do I need one? I think. Yeah, limited. Yeah.
All right. Let's Jake. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. So just to sort of summarize or to recap, so yeah, we will certainly go away, prepare a report on sort of limited funding. So I think that's still is within the guise of kind of what staff's recommendation as part of this report was. The parts that we'll have to sort through are the governance model, the funding kind of model and limits, because that starts to take us down the road of essentially the main kind of service considerations that are in the formal sense of the provincial legislation. I think what I was hearing was interest in trying to again go down the road of a policy, and we can include those considerations in a policy, but appreciate that they will not be the same as essentially the formal service establishment bylaw. But if we go down that road, then my concern is essentially we're going to have the same approval process we would for any of our other services, and all of a sudden that regional or sub-regional service may only have very few participants willing to advance it. And so this is a bit of an approach that we're hoping will seek or achieve success amongst the whole board overall, without necessarily that formal process.
Thank you, Jake. That was really helpful just in terms of framing your understanding. I see Director Arbor, and just if so, we'll try and keep things, I guess, at this point fairly brief, so we've had a chance to speak a fair amount, but please go ahead.
Yes, but it is a new motion that's being considered, and
Please go ahead. I should not, feel free.
I don't like the specificity to the community foundation. I think it kind of ties our hand a little bit when there might be other avenues as well. So, and then my second comment is the other part we haven't talked about tonight is, would that potential service also be used as a funnel for provincial grants that come our way? Because as you may recall, last term we had a lot of drama around the I think it was the poverty reduction. Anyways, that $1 million we got, and that came to the CVRD. Then there was kerfuffle. Then it got passed to Courtney. So I'm just wondering if the vehicle we're creating would also be the vehicle that is the recipient of regional grants for social purposes. Thanks.
Thanks for that. I don't believe so. I believe the intent behind the initial staff recommendation, but now this motion is that it be about grant awards that the CVRD would issue from our own requisition sources. And just to add to what Jake was saying previously around the structure for that policy, I understood there's going to be inclusion of governance and decision-making processes, criteria for grant awards, funding limits, and the process by which this policy would be administered. So I think that's what I heard. It's a summary of what I heard anyways. But we capture those pieces in the policy, and we would then of course come back to the board to introduce that policy and a series of options around it.
All right, thank you. And I certainly heard from you, Director Arbor, some concern about being just the community foundation. So of course, you're welcome to put forward an amendment if you wish. And this light in the room from Director Hillian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd be prepared to amend the proposed resolution to say collaborating with a community organization such as the Community Foundation.
Exactly.
If that would, because that would essentially give staff the latitude to explore whether there were other organizations that might be suitably set up to do something like this.
Okay, thanks for that amendment, Director Hillian. Not seeing any further comment, although as you were saying, Director Arbor, this is brand new. So if you did want to make a response to that edit, please feel free to go ahead. I didn't mean to rush you earlier. Director Hardy.
Again, just looking for some clarification here, and I appreciate the idea or the concept with regards to a community foundation administrating the funding, but does that organization take a contribution for administrating that fund? So then all of a sudden, that piece of pie that was maybe $30,000 is no longer 30,000, maybe it's 25 because of the administration fee. So I just kind of wondering about where we're going down that road. Thanks.
Yeah, we'd have to confirm that, and then that would be part of our report back from the.
I think my Courtney colleagues can correct me. I think it was 5% is the fee they charge. So on 30,000, that'd be $1,500. All right, motion on the table. Like I know we're all getting tired, and we still got the rest of our in-camera to finish. So the motion's up in front of you. All those in favor? Those opposed? All right, and that passes. And we'll move on then to I didn't get my paper agenda. Oh yeah, it was Grant and Hardy. Yeah. So item number 9 is the Hornby Island Community Hall Committee grant of application for receipt. Moved and seconded. Any opposed to receipt? Okay, and I guess we've already gone through receipt. I'll pass it over to the CAO.
Thanks, thanks, Mr. Chair. I believe Kelly Broughton, our Manager of Financial Planning, will be introducing this report. And available for questions. Kelly.
Thank you. Through the CAO to the Chair and Directors, staff are seeking a board resolution to support an application to the Comox Valley Community Foundation Grant Program for accessibility upgrades to the Hornby Island Community Hall. The Hornby Island Hall Committee is seeking an $8,500 grant for a capital project to improve accessibility within the hall. The total project is estimated to cost $12,500, with the remaining $4,000 to come from their operating budget. As the committee is not a registered charity or not-for-profit, they require a sponsor. As the sponsor, the CVRD would receive the funds and be responsible for the distribution of the grant funds according to the terms and conditions. Thank you.
Okay, pretty straightforward stuff there. Any questions at all from anyone? Okay, perfect. Moved and seconded. Yeah, I did proceed perhaps too quickly at the beginning, but yeah, we're on the recommendation. Any commentary on the recommendation? All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Fantastic. Now we're just into bylaws and resolutions. So for adoption, we have the Regional District Fireworks Regulation Bylaw number 1971, 1997. Be finally adopted. Moved, someone seconded. Thank you very much. Any opposed? That passes. Next is the CVRD District Tax Property Exemption Bylaw number 838, 2024, Sunnydale Golf Society for final adoption. Thank you. Anyone opposed? And that passes also. Number 3, CVRD Property Tax Exemption Bylaw 83389, the Union Bay Historical Society for final adoption. Moved and seconded. Any questions? Anyone opposed? And that passes unanimously. There's no new business, so we will move back in camera. We'll just take